You may be familiar with Maida-jun. To some of you, he's the man who wrote Clannad. To others, he's the songwriter of Angel Beats. Whatever the case, you'll likely know of him because of what he created. But who is Maida-jun, and why does he create? With the help of old interviews and magazine articles, radio shows and audio commentaries, diary entries dating all the way back to 1998, memories from fans, fan and critic reception over the years, and all that he has made, I hope to shine some light on one of the industry's most influential creators. This video isn't about the fictional stories we're all so familiar with. This is about a person and all that he'll leave behind. The year is 1996. Fresh out of the collapse of a bubble economy, the Bashoujo game industry of Japan is continuing its rise into greatness. Myriad corporations litter the industry, and at a small company named Scoop, Maida-jun is learning about game development. After his brief training period, which occurred during the development of Ojo-sama Nerae, Maida began working as a writer on a game named Chaos Queen Ryoko. Inspired by Murakami Haruki's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, Maida's quirk as a writer was his focus on a psychological look at relationships, paired with an anti-utopian message that a happy and perfect life is a greater ideal than one of endless satisfaction. Along with this, Leaf's earlier works and various albums became Maida's main source of industry inspiration, though for his personal tastes, fantasy and sci-fi RPGs as well as children's anime about cute young girls were his usual choices. Music was always his best friend. He found it nearly impossible to work without having music to listen to. Therein lay the truth. Maida didn't plan on becoming a writer. His passion was music. Later detailed in Satsubatsu Radio, which he often presented alongside his university friend and band buddy Nakagawa, Maida was an untrained musician. His composition style was one of trial and error. He threw random ideas at the computer and saved whatever sounded good for later. He likened his approach to music making to a school kid learning to program in BASIC. That band he was in with Nakagawa, named Chimera, was one of two bands Maida was in during his university days. The other was named Sailing Ships, formed with a fellow psychology student named Yoshida. Yet life made Maida a writer. He wrote the scenario for the first Chaos Queen Ryoko story before quitting the stifling company in a hurry and moving to Nexton, an even smaller company that was in the middle of a structural shake-up. The development studio Tactics was formed by members of a shuttered studio named Mayfair Soft, which was closed in order to switch to all-ages game development. A staff member at the time, Yet Juichi, managed to convince the company to open up a new 18+ brand, Tactics, with the stipulation that they release 2 titles a year. The small group began developing a romance simulator by the name of Dose, using an outsourced scenario writer, and when development on their next game was nearing, they began looking for writers to hire. Maida applied, got the job, and was soon working in-house alongside artists Hinoe Itaru and Miracle Mikipon on a game titled Moon. The game was planned under the Shy New Hire's vision, becoming Maida's first project. Once the planning was complete, fellow scenario writer Hisaya Naoki joined the development team, as did Maifa Shinori, as well as a composer who worked at Leaf, Orito Shinji. The song Flaming June by BT was a big inspiration during Maida's days working at Tactics. Many other songs have inspired him due to his habit of listening to music while doing work. Well, whenever he's not composing, of course. It wasn't until the development of Moon, however, that Maida learned how to compose music using a computer, taught to him by the team's 2 musicians. The software that he grew familiar with, Recomposer, remains the main program in his music-making toolset today. Partly due to tonal similarities and staff overlap with Leaf's Shizuku, Moon garnered attention, and the buzz around the game helped the yet unproven studio launch into relative popularity. When thinking about the time, Maida recalls browsing many online message boards to see what people were saying about him, and this became a long-term habit of his. But a personal highlight of this time is the Moon demo, a preview video that used assets from the game to get new players interested. The style of it is quintessential Maida, and it was developed without any knowledge of video editing by him and Hisaya. They stayed up all night and, with no budget, developed one of my favourite relics of key history. As part of Yet-Juichi's release schedule, Tactics were to follow Leaf's method of launching innocent games in between darker ones. One, another game led by Maida, would be the hope to Moon's misery. It is but one entry in a long line of stories that reject endless bliss in favour of imperfect life. With a controversial protagonist who feels cold and disconnected from reality, the roots Maida writes may not be the kind of stuff that's popular with a large audience, but they certainly make for a great, transparent look at the kinds of themes Maida prefers to focus on. At the heart of it all is a curious idea. There exists an eternal world. Kohei, a numb, dreamless boy with trauma known to disassociate, often finds himself looking at reality from afar. In his mind, he makes frequent trips to the eternal world, and in doing so, he grows further distant from existence. Maybe one day, once he has nothing to return to and no one to love, he'll never return. Although Maida led the project and created this general synopsis, few people would call his half of the game the highlight. No, when people talk about liking one, they almost always mean Hisaya's half. When the game released, the gap between Maida and Hisaya's popularity became quite clear. The 3 most popular routes were by Hisaya, and the 3 least popular routes were by Maida. Even I, Maida fan that I am, have to admit that the best routes are Hisaya's. On the 26th of June, one day before the regular edition of 1 hit store shelves, a user running a website named Flaming June wrote, "To be honest, as of this week, I'm unemployed." The staff at Nexton were hard to work with. The manager would get in the way of the writers and artists, making it hard for the team to collaborate without a wall between them. Furthermore, the 6-month deadlines were unreasonable, so the team, sans Yet-Juichi, gathered at Hinoe's house to discuss quitting the company. One of the companies Hinoe had worked at in the past, Visual Arts, was willing to take them on, and so, with Hinoe acting as the bridge between the team and Visual Arts president Takahiro Baba, Key was formed, in an office the size of an apartment room. Canon was led by Hisaya, so Maida took the backseat on this project. His habit of browsing the internet wasn't even needed to tell that, when it came to 1, Hisaya's work was the popular stuff. Maida was writer number 2 on the team. So by the end of Canon's development, the writers came to an ultimatum. One of them would leave. Let's talk about Hisaya for a bit. He was, like Maida, one of the writers who applied to Tactics during the Dose advertising. However, unlike Maida, he didn't get the job. See, they had already hired Maida by the time the advert Hisaya saw was published, but Maida wanted extra writers on the team, so the Nexton staff asked Hisaya to come in to see how things worked. One thing led to another, and Hisaya was hired as a part-timer. This awkward part-timer had no knowledge of writing. He didn't know how to use a computer, and was basically taught everything by Maida. After Moon, Hisaya became a full-time employee and work on 1 began. There, Maida said the goal was to make a story that looks accessible but is deeper than you'd think. So, Hisaya worked with the aim of creating characters who unravel from a generic initial appearance. Aside from that, the two didn't coordinate very much. They were 2 individual writers working on the same project. Hisaya's stories have these very empathetic characters that try to hold on to their image until they break, and you get the big cry scene. Maida's characters don't hold their image. They slowly lose layers and layers of themselves while you watch it unfold. Hisaya is moe, Maida is psychology. Hisaya writes angels, but Maida writes people. By depending on one another, they became key, but if you split them apart, well, it's as if they both suddenly felt the need to compensate for no longer having one another. It really shows in their next immediate works, Hisaya with Sora and Maeda up through Clannad. Sora digs into Maeda's style of setting, while Air and Clannad are filled with girls defined by quirky moe habits. Of course, their manner of making people cry is different too. Hisaya's style relies on plenty of build-up, whereas Maeda just plays a sad song while a sad thing is happening. In his own words, Maeda's way of making people cry is like hitting them with a blunt object. Personally, I would say that Air and Clannad are two of the few works where this isn't completely true. Foreshadowing is integral to the story's ultimate emotional beats, but both he and Hisaya soon returned to their original styles. Their workflow was quite different too. Hisaya would have an idea in mind, then work until that idea was complete, and the artists would follow his vision. But Maeda would work piecemeal, relying on artists to fill in the gaps in his vision so he can tell what needs fixing. He's a try and try again kind of creator. For this reason, Maeda always struggled to see his games as his. Whenever his company launched a new game, he wouldn't go to the store to see people buying it, but he would refresh web pages to see what people are saying about his writing specifically. Even when he was leading a project like with Moon, it was just a project he participated in. Maeda was a cog in the machine, Hisaya was the name on the box. So for canon, Maeda spent his time studying Hisaya's prose. Next time, I'll do my best to make readers cry was his goal. So when the game launched and the first comment submitted to the official site was by a user claiming to have cried during Makoto's route, Maeda began to feel that he might be able to do what Hisaya does after all. Later on, in the audio commentary for Kyoto Animation's canon adaptation, Maeda goes on to praise the route, and he says that he'll likely never surpass its quality. Even so, he recalls reading Bug Bug magazine and seeing that Hisaya was far more popular with readers. But that makes sense. After all, Hisaya's the man who invented Nakige. Also, that's how Maeda feels about it, but Hisaya views his work as iterative. Canon was a continuation of one. One was an answer to Moon, and Moon was, prior to Hisaya joining the team, titled Tears. So at the end of the game's development, the writers came to an ultimatum. One of them would leave. Maeda was thinking about quitting so that he wouldn't be stuck under Hisaya's shadow, but Hisaya wanted to leave as well. The rest of the staff were put in charge of deciding who would stay and who would leave, and Maeda won out. Even though, in Maeda's eyes, Hisaya was the genius writer that everybody cared about, the rest of the team didn't see it that way. Even though, in Maeda's eyes, Hisaya was the man who made people cry, Maeda was the man who made tears. What I want to highlight here is how Maeda's viewpoint is always working against his own interests. He may talk about being unpopular in magazines, but in Comteek's yearly awards, he was voted the second best scenario writer in the entire industry. He doesn't recognise his own efforts. The things he made weren't truly his. He can't do anything alone. He's addicted to reading negative feedback, and he treats himself like the rookie that no one wants. If it's not clear yet, you should know, Maeda isn't a happy man. But none of those things were why Hisaya, the great genius writer whom Maeda could never match, left the company. Hisaya left because he couldn't keep up. From the moment he joined the Moon team, Hisaya's goal was to meet the bar of a professional, the bar that Maeda set, to ensure he wouldn't be fired. So he worked for a year at Tactics, and then a further 10 months on Canon, all with very few breaks. He rarely even went to the office because the commute time would eat into his work. Not to mention the fact that Canon was being advertised as a big deal as soon as Key was formed, in order to capitalise on the relevancy of one. It was all of that effort, and yet as soon as Canon was done, Maeda began immediately working on Air. How did he do it? That's supposed to be rhetorical, but the answer is he alternates between writing and music to avoid growing exhausted with either one. Hisaya couldn't do that. He was burnt out, and he would remain burnt out for a long time. And once the 22-month grind was over, all the tension that was fueling him had vanished. Every creator is fueled by something. In order to bring nothingness into existence, you have to expend some kind of energy. For Hisaya, it was the stress of meeting each deadline that kept him going. But for Maeda, work almost seemed like an obsession. A normal person couldn't keep up with that. Reasons aside, when the two stood in President Baba's office to discuss why the other was better suited to staying with Key, their escalating argument was cut short by Baba himself. You two may not get along, but all you do is complement one another's skills. Throughout the development of Canon, Maeda had been unhappy, and he was getting ready to quit the company. The last thing he expected was to be made the leader of a new project. Visual Arts had hired more writers, and for at least one more work, Maeda had to continue his job as a writer. Was it awkward that the new writers were all fans of Hisaya? Kinda, but one of them, Fuji Tomataka, would later become one of Maeda's closest friends. Given that Air's development began as soon as Canon's concluded, the reception to Canon and the thoughts that were running through Maeda's mind during Canon's development were still fresh. Maeda spent his days and nights struggling to pinpoint what a Nakige was. How could he make people cry? What ultimately came from all of that questioning was the incredibly famous Air, with its iconic opening, its tragic ending, and its popular anime adaptation. On one half is a mythical curse that grows stronger with each generation. On the other, a blessing that grows weaker as it passes down the bloodline, mirroring the declining state of Japan's economy and of the planet's health. The bad things slowly grow worse, while the good things gradually diminish. This fantastical metaphor worked as the backing to a story largely about broken families. Youths are left to deal with the baggage of their ancestors, and guardians struggle to raise the younger generation. And it all begins with a young man travelling in search of a winged girl who is trapped in the sky. There is a strong mythos to Air, however, it has rather ordinary messaging, with themes and morals that'll continue to be told through Maeda's works time and time again. In retrospect, it's a very simple piece of fiction, but as many fans are aware, a lot of readers didn't really understand Air's story. Many fans still don't. The goal of Air, at the end of the day, was to tell a story about family, about the endless everyday, and about overcoming the confines of the life that has been given to you. It preaches a belief in happiness, but somehow, in some way, a lot of that message was lost to readers who couldn't comprehend the fantastical elements of the script. The timeline was confusing, the setting was distorted, and the themes were hard to follow. So to Maeda, Air was a disappointment. People didn't understand it, the conclusion was controversial, and interpretations of many plot points were debated by fans. However, in the hands of Kyoto Animation, it was a masterpiece. That's why it became so unfathomably popular. So for his next work, Maeda sat down to try it all again, and this time, moving the focus further into realism. Putting aside his own preferences, he began to think about what an audience might want from a story about family. Air was too niche, too bold, too bittersweet, and too much of a failure. If Maeda was to feel satisfied with his work, maybe he needed to cast a wider net. Think back to one, accessible, familiar, but deep and new. As soon as Air was done, Unicorn began.
クラナドはユニコーンっていうタイトルになってたかもしれないで。
売れてたかな?
But that name, a temporary title given by Maeda's friend Nakagawa, didn't stick, and soon Key were working on a game named Clannad. The designs were out the door in an instant and writing needed to begin, but as I said before, Maeda wasn't committed to another game after Air, and yet no one else had good enough suggestions for the story, so once again, Maeda would take charge. That being said, all of this work with minimal breaks was beginning to do a number on Maeda's mental state. Clannad, to put it lightly, was a development hell, with a rotating door of writing staff, an overworked artist driven to becoming recluse, and delays aplenty. Hinoe Taru, the artist saddled with drawing all of the sprites and CGs for this behemoth project, was stuck redrawing things over and over again under Maida's strict supervision. Some days, Hinoe didn't even go to work. Her confidence in her work plummeted as she was made to correct CGs again and again. At the end of the tiring development period, a vaguely conscious Hinoe told Baba that she didn't want to work with Maida anymore. She didn't mean this, and she quickly forgot that she'd even said it, but the word was already out. Fully understanding this, Maida made sure that Key was restructured in such a way that he wouldn't be able to overwork Hinoe ever again. This game, Clannad, was the last time that the two would ever work together. And yet, despite the damage that Clannad did to the team at Key, it was a resounding success. By focusing on a broad appeal, Maida's writing was finally given the praise he'd been hoping for. It was the story of a dreamless boy, damaged by family only to be saved by it. It took the ideals of Air and pushed them into a space everyone could understand. An appreciation of parents, a love of children, respect for friends, incremental passage and change, and salvation in all the good that you do. In the end, Clannad was the first game Maida could be truly proud of, but was it worth the losses? Was it even the type of pride he needed to feel? Was Maida even writing the story he wanted to tell anymore, or was he just carrying the weight of the responsibility that Hisaya left behind? A soul-searching journey was about to begin. It should come as no surprise that Maida hates the way that he writes. His prose is weak, so he prefers to write in shorter sentences. Furthermore, his scenarios tend to confuse people, and the longer his scenes get, the more of a problem that becomes. Fans didn't understand Moon, they didn't get Wan's Kurhair, the Kawasumi Mai route in canon went over people's heads, and Air was widely misunderstood. So it should come as even less of a surprise that what Maida's really good at is the shorter stuff. Poetry, lyrics, and music. It is very easy to focus on Maida's output as a scenario writer, but that would be like focusing on his side gig. So let's take a look at some of that music of his. In 2001, the Key and Leah project began. This was an initiative by Key to create music not related to any games, and it began with Natsukage Nostalgia. This single was popular enough to encourage Maida and Leah further, resulting in 2 further singles, Birthday Song Requiem and Speaker Hanabi Moon, in 2002 and 2003, respectively. These singles are iconic, and every Key fan should recognise them. They show up in everything from the anime adaptation of Little Busters to a random chapter of Heaven Burns Red. At the tail end of 2003, for Comiket 65, Maida worked with Clannad lyricist Hagiwara Yu and Canon and Air Sky artist Izumi Rei on a doujin album under the collective name Spice Ghost. This is an album of largely instrumental tracks. However, the first and last song on the album are sung by Ria from Euphonious, the primary vocalist of Clannad, and it carries a similar sound. Continuing his doujin album work, Maida began working on a song named Bokura no Koi. However, he became so endeared to it that it felt like a waste to release it without a professional company backing it up. So the decision was made to sell an entire album under Key's new record label, and all of the songs would be based on the single that inspired it. In 2005, with this in mind, Maida and Ria once again teamed up to create Love Song. As the title implies, it is a series of love songs, individual short stories focused on love. These songs match ideas and metaphors seen in Wan's Eternal World, Air's Girl in the Sky, Clannad's Illusionary World, and they will continue to be referenced and repurposed going forward. Much like many of those titles I just mentioned, the goal of the story is in breaking free from eternity, but also in learning to love oneself as well as others. Oh, and it's also the beginning of a long-running series that remains relevant today within Maida's latest stories, so it's pretty important. As a note for listeners, when it comes to talking about lyrics throughout this video, I will provide an off-site translation for the entire album or single in the description, in which case they will be translated by a third party. However, I will also be quoting on-screen select verses whenever they become relevant using my own translations, so if you're listening to this video rather than watching it, you are going to be missing a little bit by not looking at the screen. That's just a helpful warning. The first track, Hajimari no Saka, is a good tone setter. In it, the main character pedals up a hill while reflecting on their past. Once upon a time they had a partner, and together they felt like they could climb any hill. But that's not reality, and now the protagonist cycles home, leaving the past behind. One of the most interesting tracks, though, has to be Ao no Yume, which takes beats from Air's plot and mixes them with elements that would later be captured by Rewrite. In an endless cycle of eternity, a traveller chases their dreams while another follows behind. Whenever the traveller dies, the follower abandons life so that they may be together upon the next rebirth. This song becomes the connective tissue tying the album together, and these are the kinds of love songs contained within the album. They're often from an individual's perspective, lamenting and appreciating an imperfect relationship. Many times, those relationships have already ended. I'm saying relationship and individual because these aren't just romantic love songs, and they aren't just about humans. Take, for example, the recurring motif within Ao no Yume, where an instrument mimics the singer's voice. The song begins with a single voice, but as the singer loops through the cycles of eternity, more voices are added, one of which is an instrument. A later song, Gramophone, tells the story of a gramophone who falls in love with a singer's voice and tries to sing along. It's not just about human love nor romantic love. It's about trying to figure out what love is. One of these love songs is told as an ancient myth, and it's all about a goddess who loves a dying planet. She created wind, and wind brought motion, yet one day it stopped. She created summer, and the sun brightened the world, yet one day it ended. She created time, yet one day it froze. There, the girl remains, buried in the cold earth, protecting what remains forever. As everything else becomes a myth for distant planets to share, she remains, dreaming of eternity. It's an inability to let go of the past. Now, putting aside the narratives of Love Song, a lot of songs from this album get remixed or covered and reused in Maida's future work. And it should be noted that this wasn't just paving the future, it was also pulling from the past. The 10th song in the album, for example, Koridoke, is a remake of the final song from the previously mentioned Spice Ghost album. And I of course have to mention that the final song and the namesake of the album, Love Song, is later used in Tomoyo After as the very first song that plays after you hit that start button. The meaning of the song itself will continue to be relevant, so keep these lyrics in mind. Maida was looking to work with Izumi Rei on something greater than a small doujin album, and a story from his school days was the perfect excuse to do so. Hibiki no Maho is about a young girl named Hibiki. She's not the smartest, but the professor she acts as an apprentice to is a prodigy in the field of magic. The field of magic is ultimately the pursuit of immortality, and the professor's time is running out. Magic in this world requires sacrifice, and he's been giving up his memories for a long time. As part of his experiments, the two attempt to temporarily shift his soul into a squirrel. However, an ill-timed intrusion disrupts the spell, leaving him trapped in the body of an animal. To escape those seeking out his research, the duo abandon his human body and escape to the capital, to the Royal Magical Academy, where Hibiki uses her teacher's fame to land a job. As she can't use magic or understand complicated theories, she's given the job of teaching a class of delinquents that no other teacher wants to deal with. Like this, the story of Hibiki, a girl with no talent who nevertheless tries her hardest, begins. More than that, it's really a series of love stories, mostly bittersweet ones. One person holds another close, tragedy strikes, and the lone survivor develops a trauma that Hibiki's healing presence eventually soothes. If Love Song was about the happiness of being together and the reality of needing to one day let go, Hibiki no Maho is about moving on from that. It's about the healing process. There's no happy ever after in life. Bad things happen. Even so, the happiness you've felt is a very precious thing. Take the happiness that life gave you and turn it into hope for the future. Throughout the episodic stories of Hibiki no Maho, the young talentless girl holds onto her belief that magic can bring people happiness. But really, it's not magic that makes people happy, it's Hibiki. Hope is her magic. After the success of Clannad, a follow-up focusing on Maida's most popular Clannad heroine, and Maida's own favourite, Sakigami Tomoyo, was set for development. And this was quite a big deal. It would be the very first spin-off title that Key would release. It would also be the first large Key title to launch with voice acting, and it would be the very first large Key title to not feature Hinoe Taru's artwork. She was on a year-long vacation, and her relationship with Maida was strained, so she was being replaced. And also, the game would be almost entirely linear. All of these bold new decisions weren't enough, however, as once again, Maida's focus returned to its usual place. Maida's gonna write the story he wants to write, focusing on two characters with tragic backstories who, in longing for happiness they didn't get to feel, try to start a family. They have different stories, different talents, different social expectations, and different desires, but they're in love. So, putting aside their own life experiences and their own personal understandings of what life is, they choose to blindly believe in love and happiness, that despite hardship, life is wonderful.
今日までいろんな家族を見てきた。自分の家族も含めて。いつも教えられるのは、自分が理解している家族の姿なんてのは、ほんのちょっとで。その形は無数にあって、その一つ一つは海のようにどこまでも深くて、簡単に計り知れるようなものではない。それでも、私は知りたい。たくさんの家族の形を知りたいんだ。そうすることで、もっといろんなものが輝き出すと思うんだ。当たり前のことを、もっとかけがえなく感じられると思うんだ。大切に生きなければと思うようになると思うんだ。そして、そういう経験をたくさんの人に伝えたい。人生の素晴らしさを伝えたい。いろんなことで悩んでいる人がいる。そういう人の力になりたい。そうだ。そうしたい。
In essence, it is Love Song or Hibiki no Maho, but stretched out into a whole novel. It was a ballsy decision considering the response to air, and naturally, the reception to the original release of Tomoyo After and to the intimate message Maida gave to fans was pretty controversial. Maida was expecting some backlash, at least, but it's a game that, even today, is infamously love or hate. So much so that the prepared to fail Maida was shocked by just how much hate it got, and as a result, he was put on a short mental health break. In the same way Hinoe watched as a new artist took her place for Tomoyo After, Maeda was now being replaced on the very same game. Quite fittingly, a song he wrote for Leah during this break was titled Karma. He spent most of the downtime playing Shadow of the Colossus, and later said that the game saved him. So while Maeda was on a break, a new writer, Tonokawa Yuto, was brought onto the project. He joined Key as part of the shake-up after the nightmare development of Clannad, and his first job was to rewrite Tomoyo After while Maeda was on a break, to make it into something that audiences would prefer. Take a story, make it commercial. Easy job. He restructured the game, he added more foreshadowing and build-up to the final arc, and he made the conclusion a bit vaguer so that readers who disagreed with the message could come up with their own interpretation. But it didn't drastically change the message, so I'm not sure how effective the changes were at converting haters into likers. If anything, the best it will do is make someone hate it a little bit less. Unlike Air, the difference in reception isn't due to a confusing plot or fundamental writing decisions making it hard to follow, but it's instead a difference in opinion. The themes of the work and the morals are overwhelmingly present, so whether you agree with those morals or not can make or break the entire game for you. What one person views as a good thing may be viewed by another as a bad thing. Events, character writing, everything. So whether you'll love it or hate it, whether you'll prefer Maeda's original or Tonokawa's rewrite, it's impossible to know until you've already experienced at least one of them. It's an unfortunate position to be in, especially considering that the largest and most substantial of the changes occurs during the game's ending. But you know, to Maeda's diehard fans, this is one of his greatest works. It's Maeda's voice, loud and true. Therefore, I believe it's wise to recommend Tonokawa's version to a general audience who aren't as much of a fan of Maeda's writing, but Maeda's version to people who like Maeda's style specifically. Much like One and Air, Tomoyo After was a rejection of eternity. It's written in the belief that a beautiful dreamer-type scenario where everyone lives these long, unsatisfying lives isn't what life is about. Hopefully by now you're starting to recognise a pattern in Maeda's output. He's constantly grappling with priorities of expectation. Does he make something good, or does he make something commercial? Does he make what he wants to make, or does he fulfill the duty left to him when Hisaya left the company? It's a battle he'll continue to have with himself, and it's something that'll divide the fanbase between Key fans and Maeda fans. When it comes to Maeda's thoughts on Tomoyo After, one thing that'll shine through as the years pass is how much he likes the ending song, Life is Like a Melody. During a live performance of the song for Key's 10th anniversary, Maeda spoke to the audience about the song's intimate relationship with Tomoyo After as a story, and how that story garnered a lot of hate, but he loves it even so. As he did so, the audience shouted their love for it. I think I ended up writing an esoteric theme, so mainstream fans were like, what even is this? But dedicated fans get it, and they really praise the game when given a chance. There are people out there who really relate to this kind of story. I think this is really how life is. With the new kid on the block, Tonokawa seeming like a hopeful recruit for Key's long-term future, Little Busters was started as a training project for him as well as some other staff. Maeda, who for Tomoyo After had given up on trying to mimic Hisaya's moe-oriented writing style, had begun to accept his reputation for writing characters that women loved but men didn't care about, as if that were the fact. Due to this, he resigned himself to writing the main characters, which means the male members of the main cast, as well as the main heroine, Rin, all of whom would be the focus of the main route of Little Busters. The other heroine routes were left in the hands of new writing staff who could better capture the appeal of cute girls, with Maida only stepping in to correct things when one or more of the main characters were involved. Originally, all of these characters were intended to be under the purview of Naga, an artist that the company had been training since the staff shakeup that occurred during Air's development. However, he refused to accept the project unless Hinoe was also brought on board. These two aspects, the split of writing staff and the split of artists, led to a conveniently easy delegation of responsibilities. Naga would mainly draw for Maida, while Hinoe would support the other writers. Once again, the story would be a rejection of eternity, where characters accept a degree of loss in order to move forward. From Masato's refusal to lose, to Kenga's loss of a classmate, from Kyosuke's grand plan, to Riki's final outcome. Life is beautiful, it is wonderful, but it isn't eternal. Fittingly, when Little Busters was done, Maida announced that he would finally be stepping away from his writing role at Key, and that the next game, Rewrite, would be left to Key's new writing team. His role as a writer was not eternal. Somehow, the media took this to mean that he was completely retiring, and the rumour soon spread. Maida was quitting. Within the media, there was one certain individual. A young man named Toba Yosuke had graduated from university with 3 big goals. Goal 1 was to work with Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli. Goal number 2 was to work with Studio Gainax. And goal 3 was to work with Maida Jun. Surprisingly, he tackled these 3 goals like a speedrunner. First, he got into Studio Ghibli, proved himself, and became an assistant director on Howl's Moving Castle. Then he worked as an associate producer on the equally iconic Gurren Lagann. And then finally, as a producer at Aniplex, he used his connections at Dengeki G's magazine to try and launch a project with Maida before his announced retirement. This would be his one and only chance. An editor of manga who had been involved with Dengeki G's Clannad serialization, a man named Nakatsuji Yukita, was expecting to meet with the kind of person who was simply trying to latch onto the success of Kyoto Animation's Key adaptations, but instead, he found that Toba was truly a fellow Key fan. So in 2006, this dynamic duo met with Maida and assistant writer Fuji Tomataka at the Visual Arts office to discuss a new project. Now, Maida, who, as we said before, was planning on moving away from writing after Little Busters wrapped up development, didn't enter this meeting with much hope. "I can't write anymore," he said. "I can't tell emotional stories." But when faced with Toba's enthusiasm for Key and for his own works, Maida agreed to do the project. Planning began unofficially, while Toba looked for a studio to finalise a production date with. But it was a slow process. On Key's side, Maida took up writing, Fuji worked in planning, and Naga, who was now the lead artist for Key, was put in charge of character design. Toba found himself talking to a support animation studio named PA Works, who at the time were looking to transition into being a main studio capable of leading projects. It was with these partners involved that Angel Beats became a thing. It was meant to be a multimedia project. Toba and PA Works wanted a TV show, Maida wanted to sell music, and Nakatsuji wanted to print manga. It was touted as the Maida Jun Festival. But no one could have expected this three-pronged attack to be as successful as it was. The success of Angel Beats, not only as an anime but as an IP in general, would go on to define Visual Arts as a company. The money from the project would bankroll Key during a turbulent time, and the use of a single new IP to access multiple markets at the same time soon became standard for the company, as did collaboration with other companies. But while working on the show, with staff both familiar and unfamiliar to him, Maida began to feel his age. the people around him were getting married, starting families, and living normal lives. From lifelong friends such as Nakagawa to longtime business pals like Leah. Even that young writer Maeda got along with, Fuji, had become a real family man. In diary entries, he would go on to contemplate the fact that people he'd known were suddenly becoming adults and having children. Those children were running around. He was interacting with them. Time was moving. In songs, he would go on to write about how people live lives obsessed with work or family, and he didn't want to hear any of it. Furthermore, Maeda's health was growing worse and worse, little by little. He had become obsessed with drinking, he had become obsessed with smoking. And the stress of everything around him was beginning to wear him down. Although Angel Beats was a financial success, its reputation was far from perfect. Fans with high expectations were disappointed with Angel Beats. To a vocal minority, it was rushed, repetitive, derivative, unfinished, commercialized, and unfunny. And though it was a minority, it was a lot of people. Once again, Maeda fixated on the negative outcry, and as a result, Angel Beats became a failure. In his head, it was both a commercial success he'd forever struggle to replicate, while also being a drastic failure that audiences hated. Further proof that Maeda was a terrible writer. So when Maeda at a low-key event announced that they were beginning to work on a video game adaptation, one that may take more than 5 years to develop, the massive new fans were overcome with excitement. The success story known as Angel Beats was about to become the catalyst of a disaster. When it comes to Rewrite, a project led by Hinoe Taru now that she was effectively out of a job, Maeda didn't have much involvement, but he did write some music. Orita, who was composing for the project, worked with a singer named Yanagi Nagi on a couple vocal tracks. Much like Ria's jump from Clannad to Love Song, Yanagi Nagi's work on Rewrite would lead her to sing for Owari no Hoshi no Love Song. Released by Flaming June, obviously titled after the album that Maeda-jun loved so much, Owari no Hoshi no Love Song was a spiritual successor to the Love Song album. This time, following on from Rewrite's environmentalist themes, the stories would all be set on a dying world. Nature is going wild, people are going crazy, the planet is nearing its end, and there's little hope for the future. In such a world, what love songs can be written? A young girl falls in love with the boy she grew up alongside, but he falls in love with someone else. Distraught, the girl leaps back in time to try and change how things unfold, but in doing so, she erases her past self from existence. When she arrives in the past, no younger than before she leapt, the child she grew up alongside is in a panic. He's searching for a girl who went missing. After watching him grow more and more distant, she, against her better judgment, admits the truth. She's the girl he's looking for. But the moment those words leave her lips, a hole in space opens up to swallow her, sending her back to where her journey through time first started. In a grey, lifeless world, a girl stares at an old photo of a boy she once loved. She puts the photo aside and walks away, into a world that has already met its end. In truth, her journey through time began long after life on this planet ended. These are love songs from a dead planet, post-apocalypse type media, and stylistically, it is all over the place. Maeda was now putting more focus on his music career, and he was using this album as a way to try things he hadn't done before. But plot-wise, there's a very clear thread. It's all about finding a meaning to life. A lot of the songs are depressing, but sometimes they come with a glimmer of hope. Unlike the original love song, the topics covered here are disparate due to it including a healthy mix of older songs that never got wide distribution. The ninth song in the album, Yuki no Furanai Hoshi, is a cover of a song from Maeda's university days. It's about a couple who spend their time together, laughing, having fun. It goes through the winters they spend together, year after year. Oh, and the original is better. I'll just play a bit of it. I'll play both versions, why not?
もう知らずに生きて
Of course, the song eventually ends, so it didn't last forever. Is there happiness to be found in denial? Maybe. In this album you can find other retreads of old material, but in a different sense. This song, Last Smile, is a science-oriented adaptation of Hibiki no Maho's Popular Beats. A dumb boy struggles to learn from a professor that he admires, a professor with little life left, in order to reassure her that her findings will go on to save people long after she's gone. There's also the 12th track, a collaboration between Maeda and his Camella bandmate Nakagawa, which tells the story of a boy who longs to become a hero. He travels a ruined world hoping to gather the world's legendary figures, which are the characters from the previous songs. With all of them together, he might be able to save the world, but he completely fails and not a single person joins him. Upon realizing his powerlessness, he returns home to entertain the children and to try and make their lives just a little bit better, unknowingly becoming their hero in the process. But really, the highlight of the album has to be the cover song, the finale, Konohoshi no Birthday Song. It begins ever so simply with a man listening to his pregnant wife share stories of the world she used to know, with their yet unborn child. There were seasons, there were stars, the simple beauties of reality, but her partner worries that bringing a child into a world that is on the verge of extinction might not be the right thing to do. This is the real meaning of the album. Despite what depressing themes may be present in the album, it ends on a message of continuance and togetherness, a theme that, in time, will paint a strong picture of Maeda's dream of life. Almost a direct mirror to Tomoyo After in its final lines. Belief in the beauty of life, of Earth, and of the people beside you will bring you eternal happiness. Even when things are sad, you'll have already learned that life is wonderful, and that can never be taken away. But with the dream of life now over, let us return to reality.
忘れたかっていう感じなんですけど、
小さな手でもいつの日か僕ら追い越してゆくんだ。やがて来る日は新しい季節を開いた。
Fans of Maeda Jun like to say, his singing voice is a scream from the heart. That may to some sound like a polite way of saying that he's not well trained, but it's an incredibly apt description. His voice is like a desperate howl. So what better way to professionally debut than with a desperate howl of a song? This song, Hikikomori no Uta, tells the story of a man named Maeda Jun. You might have heard of him. He spends his life in a room, watching anime, playing guitar, and imagining himself as a rock star on a stage. Sadly, he's not talented, so he'll never be a star. He's growing older, so his body is becoming less capable, his interests are beginning to dry up, and he no longer has the energy to play video games. He lives aimlessly, having nothing to believe in, no one to love, but even still, he lives, using his music to make pop songs that'll succeed commercially or fit into games aimed at a general audience is what his life is all about. The song ends on an idea that he's alive, trapped in a boogie world, but because of that, he can play music and he can sing. And sometimes, very rarely, that music sounds beautiful, and he wants you to know that. Like he did when he wrote the final track of Owari no Hoshi no Love Song, like he did when he wrote Tomoyo After, like he'll continue to do. Making good on the 5-year promise, Maeda's VN adaptation of the Angel Beats storyline released in early 2015 to decent reception. However, Angel Beats' first beat wasn't a full adaptation, rather it was a small portion of a planned mega project, with each entry adding a few alternate routes to the anime plotline. This decision would allow them to create a truly gigantic story without dedicating an entire profitless decade to the development of a new game. Angel Beats had, since 2010, been the primary IP for Key's merchandising, even through the release of Rewrite. So a constant stream of new stories from the IP would allow them to continue to push figures of Canada, posters of Yuri, and CDs of Girls Dead Monster. I mean, what an incredible idea, right? Just continue to milk it. But the lukewarm reception to the first entry wasn't a great sign. That being said, it wasn't a death sentence either. The prequel manga was drying up, the mobile game had ended, but the IP could still push on. So long as Maeda was willing to bear with the online negativity and keep writing, Angel Beats could continue to be a cash cow.
明日、明後日がね、ちょっと俺病院行かなくちゃいけないので、最初に話したように、なんか心臓に異常があるらしくて、俺はちょっとね、いかんので、明日っちゅうか正確に言ったら今日か。でも0時過ぎるから明日か正確に。ちょっとね、金曜日は、なので木曜日はちょっと打てないっす。
On February 26, 2016, Maeda rushed to a local hospital, believing to have suffered a collapsed lung. He hadn't, but the staff advised him to admit himself to the hospital. Maeda didn't want to be a bother, so he refused, but 2 days later, Maeda's condition got a lot worse. He doesn't entirely remember what happened, but he seemingly returned to the hospital, and that very night, he suffered a heart attack. Nothing that the small hospital could do could help him, so he was transferred to a major hospital, where he was brought in to undergo emergency surgery. 10 hours later, and against all odds, Maeda left the operating room alive. Ultimately, the Angel Beats visual novel project was cancelled, and the last hurrah of the franchise was given to Asami Yuriko, the mangaka who worked on the prequel manga Heaven's Door. That's a good manga, by the way, you should go read that. Maeda would write the script from his hospital bed, titled Angel Beats The Last Operation, and marketed as the Angel Beats that Maeda wanted to create. It was an unfinished adaptation of the anime of questionable quality, and it was widely criticised. Releasing between 2018 and 2020, it had no notable differences to the anime, and was at times more rushed, with the reputation of the franchise tarnished by underwhelming cancelled work after underwhelming cancelled work. The IP fell silent in 2020, except for a pachinko slot machine in 2021. But in 2023, the franchise would return in a couple of small ways. First, as part of a collaboration with another key title, and then as a spin-off comedy manga titled Tabisuru Tenshi-chan. We will get into that 2023 collaboration a bit, as it was handled by Maeda, but first, let's switch our attention back to him. Why did he suddenly fall so ill? And what impact did it have on his future? To answer those questions, we have to go back to 2014. In June of 2014, an overworked Maeda began to feel incredibly ill. A mysterious disease or something had suddenly struck, and his heart had begun to pound like crazy. He went to the hospital, but as Maeda had a known panic disorder, the doctor attributed it to that. Not wanting to make a big deal about it, Maeda returned home and dealt with the constant panic attack for 6 days. Eventually, he decided to take a heap of sedatives, and that finally calmed his heart. In 2015, as part of a new anime project involving the team that put Angel Beats together, Maeda rebooted his Satsubatsu radio show, and he casually told this story. But in retrospect, Maeda had likely spent those 6 days walking around despite a heart failure. This, as I'm sure you can imagine, was almost certainly the main factor in his 2016 hospitalization. That new anime project was titled Charlotte, and it was an attempt by all involved parties to recapture the magic and profits of Angel Beats. With an even larger cast of quirky characters, another school setting backed by supernatural powers, double the amount of bands to make albums for, multiple manga series announced right out of the gate, and statements from staff who claimed that they would avoid the mistakes of their previous project, the Charlotte project seemed to be going all in on surpassing Angel Beats. But was it successful? No, it wasn't. Much of Charlotte's run ended with a song named Yakeochi Nai Tsubasa, an old song from Maida's band Sailing Ships. But for the final episode, Maida worked with a singer named Kumaki Anri, notable for singing a theme song in one of Shinkai Makoto's films. The result of this collaboration, Kimi no Moji, is a beautifully sentimental track that tells of a lonely boy who has grown distant from the people he loves, while lamenting his loss of an ordinary life. You may be thinking that this theme sounds like a bit of a love song entry, but shortly after this, Kumaki Anri would look to team up again, which was a surprise to Maida. Charlotte was a failure, so why would they still want to work with him? Maybe they're hoping for another Angel Beats to happen? Either way, the next song on the docket would be Maida's chance to write a song for the big key novel he had little part in, Rewrite. Instead of focusing on the action and violence, he'd put the attention squarely on a romance during the end of the world. Now, reading those lyrics, you may be thinking that this song sounds like a bit of a love song entry, but I hope you're ready for a surprise, because Maida and Kumaki Anri would team up once again to make a love song album. Produced during in and out stays at the hospital, Maida's newest album has a long story behind it. One particular track may catch the attention of casual onlookers above all others. A Clannad-themed lullaby sung to Ushio by Tomoya. This was a song that Maida had written spontaneously during the airing of Kyoto Animation's Clannad adaptation, and he debuted it during a legendary performance back in 2009 for Key's 10th anniversary celebration. During the event, he sang a bunch of his own songs on stage and told stories about their creation. He wanted to sing a song named Karma too, but he left that to Leah. Back to Long Long Love Song, what listening through the song list and reading the lyrics won't tell you is, well, prepare yourself for the depression spiral. We've got yet another diary, and this time it's named the Long Long Love Song Production Diary, sometimes written while hospitalized. The main focus of the diary is on the album's direction, including Maida's constant battle between making something meaningful to himself or making something commercially viable. Make 13 songs that'll sell well and audiences will like. I thought that was my responsibility doing this job. While Angel Beats and Charlotte were airing, thousands of people were flaming me every second. Coming from that rough of an experience, I'm fine being true to myself this time. I'll be ready to take on the hate. A decent portion of the diary is spent on detailing his journey to, and time in, hospital. I've been drinking like a fish since 2010. It's not like I liked alcohol that much, I just couldn't live life while I was sober, that's it. If I wasn't drunk, I couldn't handle it. That's life. I held on to hope and believed that I was seeing a nightmare and that the next time I awoke, I'd be in bed back home, but no matter how many times I woke up, the nightmare continued. So, eventually, I had to accept that this was reality. I began to go crazy. I thought it would be better to just jump to my death, but then I wouldn't have even had the strength to reach the window. I'm a writer who tells stories about miracles, so being able to use the word about myself was big news. A lot of people said things like, "I want more of your work, so please live." But of all of them, it was the singer of Little Buster's Refrain's theme song, Suzu, who said, "You don't have to make anything else, just please live, don't leave us." It brought tears to my eyes. And then the rest is spent on grappling with the future, really. For what to do next, I asked Twitter for ideas. I got all kinds of responses, but all of the replies were like requests for a novel. I can't write a novel. Sometimes I write scenarios or music that people think are good, but I want to specialize in one of them. I can write game scenarios, but I can't write a novel. I can write songs, but I can't arrange them. I can't write and I can't make music by myself. Without help from anyone else, I can't even complete a job in my own trade. So now I've thrown up the idea I'd already given the okay to, and I've asked them to try it again. Once again, I'm the dictator of dumb retakes, parading my power around and making constant trouble for everyone else. The defining song of the album's legacy has to be the one represented on the CD jacket. A young woman living in an abusive household sticks around to be with the man that she loves. That man happens to witness one of her father's acts of abuse and begins to assault him. The police are called, and the man ends up in jail. But the girl he loved goes on to live a happy life, now free from her abusive father. With the passage of time, she moves on from her first love, she falls in love with someone else, she gets married and starts a family, forever thankful to the man who saved her. This story is, like one's Nagamori route or Tomio After's original version, a very divisive story. In his diary, Maeda explained that he was considering changing the ending or making it lighter, because he knew that people wouldn't like it, but after spending a couple weeks thinking about it, he ultimately decided to leave it the way it is. There will be people who hate it, but changing it would dilute the message. And that was, at the end of the album's development, the answer Maeda settled on. It doesn't have to be loved by everyone, so long as the people who understand it, like it. And with this, Maeda finally resolved himself to live a life where he makes what he wants to make. As of 2024, Maeda's profile picture on Twitter is still the hero of this story. So, despite the rocky reception to Charlotte, Maeda seemed to have finally found some focus. The wishy-washy, do two things decently well approach wasn't satisfying him, but with this pivot towards making music, surely things would improve, right? A doctor informed him that his lung capacity had been drastically reduced. Maeda's dream of singing his own music was now impossible. Maeda passed his songs over to someone else, and thus, Satsubatsu Kids was born. Point of attention number 1 of this initial album, titled Hikikomori Songs, is that it includes Hikikomori no Uta, now sung by Hyun. It still sounds nice, but without Maeda's piercing vocals, it doesn't hit the same way. Notable tracks that this album includes are Birthday Song Requiem, a reference to the Leah single of a similar name, Hanabi, a cover of the Leah song, Haido no Hane, a cover of the Love Song track, and Real, a cover of a song from Charlotte's How Low Hello. Aside from the fan service on show, the meat is in the lyrics. Look at Birthday Song Requiem, for example. It's a song about Maeda losing his ability to sing. Sound familiar? That's Maeda during Canon's development, listening to a Mr. Children song in order to stay focused under the pressure of Hisaya's fame. This is an honest Maeda song, as are a lot of his newer songs, and you might get a sense of that if you listen without context, but you probably won't realise how honest he's being without the knowledge we now have. Maeda himself is the story of these albums, and unless you've read his geeky notes on random video games via different diaries or something like that, the change of him growing bored of games to then selling them won't resonate as strongly. If you haven't read the story from the Canon development diary about the team collectively dying after eating too much pizza together, the line in the song where he's begging for a pizza delivery guy to save him won't have anywhere near as much emotional heft behind it. And if you haven't read Tomio's route, the pain of trying to walk alongside someone far more talented than you might not connect in the same way. There was a single titled Dis Love Song, and it contains, obviously, the titular song Dis Love Song, a rejection and begrudging acceptance of the themes seen in the Love Song albums, Life is Like a Melody, a cover of the Tomio After ending song, and Tokyo Kizamu Uta, a cover of the Clannad After Story opening song. What we have here technically isn't a Love Song album. The track of the single, Dis Love Song, imbues that depressed teenager energy defining Satsubatsu Kids into the usual formula, with a lyric sheet partly scribbled over out of regret or shame. The lead character considers himself to be ugly and talentless. He won't be loved by anyone. He won't have that special encounter that all the Love Song characters had. All he can do is imagine that someone is there beside him. It is a literal Dis Love Song. The feeling that the protagonist of the story gives, that do I deserve to be with someone else, is a hallmark of Maeda's writing, going all the way back to Moon. Some of his earliest roots, like Nagamori in 1, Mai in Canon, Tomio in Clannad, all incorporate this sentiment and make it the defining drama of the story. In Maeda's fiction, a crucial hurdle to finding love is in escaping that self-loathing. How can you love someone else if you don't love yourself? But what I find most fascinating about this album is what it includes. Number 1, a counterpart to Love Song. That makes sense. But track number 2 is the Tomoyo After Ending song, which is a bit random, but then it's a favourite of his and it's from a story where he was similarly open and honest, so maybe it fits. But then track 3 is the Clannad After Story opening, and why? How does that fit in? You'll find out later.
たくさんの宝石を詰めた宝箱のような思い出となった。世界が終わり、滅びようとも。この思い出だけは消えたりはせん。わしの永遠の宝物じゃ。
Once again, the team got back together to make an original anime, Kamisama ni Natta Hi. Various staff spoke about all the errors they made in the past and vowed to refine their formula. Maeda had learned that he's bad at writing anime scripts, so he would be extra attentive towards the pacing of this one. He knew that people didn't cry at Charlotte's ending, but this time, he'll be going all out. This will be his greatest work. It has to be. It wasn't. Maeda was about to, yet again, hole himself away from a loud, negative response, and this time, the degree of negativity was going to be overwhelming. To people looking back with hindsight, Maeda's confident marketing of this show as the best thing he'd ever make may seem foolish or deceitful or just dumb, but it makes more sense when you consider his perspective. Everyone involved had learned some important lessons during the previous 2 anime projects, and Maeda was more aware of them than ever. The second episode of the show would go on to parody his own failings, as the cast tries to film a movie, but repeatedly rushes to a conclusion. Furthermore, the show would be partially an adaptation of a song Maeda once wrote. First featured in 2006 on Leah's album Dearly, and placed immediately after a cover of Canon's opening song, was Karma. Karma was, like Life is Like a Melody, Maeda's pride and joy, one of the best songs he had ever made. If you thought you were getting a break from the endless chain of love songs, you were mistaken.
アン、長老に呼び出されたって何があったの？
知らぬ。それよりもロミ、また歌の練習をするぞ。付き合うのじゃ。
もちろん。アンは本当に歌が好きなんだね。
Karma tells the story of a girl who, even though she's clumsy and hopeless, was said to be able to save the world at the cost of her own life. The people dressed her up in fancy clothes and treated her as a hero. A boy in love with her clumsy demeanour resented this. He didn't care about the legend people were spreading, and he saw her for what she was. A cute girl who couldn't crack an egg properly or sing very well. She can't save the world, so don't take her away. He's fine doing the singing, he'll crack all the eggs, just leave her alone. What is happiness? That's the question that Kamisama ni Natta Hi asks. If you could quantify happiness scientifically, wouldn't that be great? A young girl named Hina, dressed in the habit of a nun, introduces herself as a god. The boy on the other end of the conversation, Yota, doesn't believe her, and yet her ability to predict future events is worryingly accurate. So her prediction that the world will end in 30 days, surprisingly, is never really taken seriously. I mean, the world won't just randomly end in a month's time, right? With the first half of the show almost entirely dedicated to episodic comedy, viewers are strung along by a small mystery of a heroine claiming to be a god. The second half begins an arc in which the protagonist helps his little sister, a film student, produce an original film. That film is, of course, Karma. Yota plays the hero, and Hina plays the heroine. There are some personality differences between them and the original characters, but the thematic parallel works, and so it acts as the through line for the final 6 episodes.
ほら、ひなと口調が被ってる。
The problem with it was, unfortunately, that Karma was a mere through line, the events surrounding it were far more divisive. With all the hype that marketing played, the claims of them learning from their mistakes and making the saddest thing ever made, a negative backlash was sure to arise. But for what it's worth, I do think they made some good on their marketing promises. When it comes to pacing, for example, they certainly improved. A concerted effort was clearly put in to start the plot-relevant stuff earlier than usual, and to make it take up a larger bulk of the script, but in responding to the criticism, some other elements fell to the wayside. It was far from the most heartbreaking anime of all time. The cast of characters was pretty weak, and it was maybe the worst looking of the three shows, so for a show like this, in isolation, such negativity, I think, was misplaced, but for the third entry in a line of disappointments backed by poor marketing, maybe some frustration was justified. Were it any other team with any other writer, it'd be a perfectly fine anime. But Maida's a man who people have expectations of. He's supposed to be Hisaya, so why didn't we all cry? The world asked, sometimes a little too much. It appeared that since the hospitalization, Maida's role had been reduced to one of music many won't care about, and anime that people hate. But behind the scenes, something big was brewing. A Maida-made RPG always seemed like a possibility. He was talking about his love for the genre even before joining Key. Fans had speculated during the Angel Beats teasers that it was an RPG, and for the VN adaptation, an RPG system of gameplay was even considered. So, when it was announced that Maida would be writing and composing for a visual novel RPG hybrid, the excitement around it was, well, it was a live service mobile game with gacha mechanics, so the PC crowd wasn't overwhelmingly happy about it, but at the very least, Maida was back writing, and making his first original game in 15 years, and this time, it was being paired with the music he'd been working so hard to focus on throughout the past decade. People were happy. If Angel Beats was the Maida Festival, then this was to be the Maida theme park. The reveal came with music composed by Maida and sung by Yanagi Nagi, the same duo behind Owari no Hoshi no Love Song. A collection of these songs would be collated into an album titled Love Song from the Water. The game would also feature a band named Sheer's Legend, with both albums and singles planned for the band throughout the game's development. Beyond those, there were further Yanagi Nagi songs produced. One that I'd like to highlight is Sailing Ship, the name of which may sound familiar if you have a good memory. It's a reference to his university band days, and it's not the only callback to his older output in Heaven Burns Red. No, this game really is, as I already put it, a Maida theme park. If you, for example, listen to Satsubatsu Radio before playing Heaven Burns Red, you'll recognise a bunch of the conversations that characters in-game have as ones that happened in a radio broadcast. If you reach the end of a chapter and the credits begin to scroll, you may find yourself thinking, wasn't this one of the songs on Birthday Song Requiem? But with the blend of old came a whole heap of new, from swathes of new music to the modern Maida style of writing featured in titles like Angel Beats and Charlotte, along with a couple collaboration stories focusing on characters who were intended to get roots in Angel Beats' second beat. A light in plot main quest follows a rock star-made child soldier, Luca, who lives in a depressing post-apocalypse scenario. The player explores memories of normality within this dying world, resulting in hours of conversations about food, manzai comedy routines, and army operation planning. It's an appreciation of normal life in a setting where such a thing needs to be fought for. Surprisingly, this kind of game became popular with audiences old and new. Maida himself was perplexed at how positive the reception was, even though he hadn't done anything different from before. Why is everyone in love with this but not the previous thing he made? Whatever the answer, Heaven Burns Red was an immediate success, and it had continued to soldier on with frequent side stories and single releases, keeping fans engaged. But one has to wonder, all those people who love Heaven Burns Red, how would they react if these references to Maida's past became the centre of attention? How much of it would they be able to appreciate? It's an interesting question to ask. In the mid-2000s, Maida found himself browsing a bulletin board site where people were announcing their marriages. He looked at those messages and thought, oh, so these are normal people. A question you may have wondered earlier on in this video, specifically around Hisaya's inability to keep up with Maida's endless pursuit of work, is why was Maida overworking himself? Why didn't he take a break in between each game? Well, Maida isn't a healthy man. There was a blip in Maida's schedule. His big projects were all either complete or at a point in production where he couldn't really do anything, so he had a bit of free time. With this free time, he drove himself crazy. He couldn't just stare at his phone all day distracted like ordinary people could. A man from the welfare centre, focused on mental health, told Maida that he could drop in and chat whenever he wanted to, but Maida didn't want to be a bother to anyone else, so he declined. However, one of the suggestions the man gave him somehow made it through Maida's barrier of rejections. If you have so much free time, why not write a novel? It was an innocent question that only someone who doesn't know Maida could suggest, and maybe that's why it worked. Maida would, for the first time in his career, create something all by himself. For the first time, he put aside his responsibility of continuing the legacy of Hisaya, and he wrote whatever he wanted to. It was a depressing story, darker than even the company's president expected. But therein lay the honesty. It was a work he could be proud of. What Maida wrote was a novel about the unfair world he'd been born into. A young adult named Toki Tsubaki has taken over for her grandfather in monitoring a famous suicide spot. It is the job of this youth to convince people not to give up on life. As it so happens, a woman looking to jump from the cliff turns up, and the two have a confrontation. The suicidal lady claims that she wants to see outside the world, a place one arrives at upon death. This throwaway bit of fantasy blends with some comedic narration in between the initial drama, so it at first appears to be the usual Maida storytelling affair, albeit with an immediately darker subject matter than usual. In case it's not already obvious, the lady looking to kill herself is a representation of Maida. She visits her parents maybe once a year. She drives herself mad whenever she isn't distracted by writing music, which is in itself a draining process. She looks down on pop music for being easy commercialized trash, but it's also how she makes a living, and making a living is what matters. She doesn't like to rely on others because she doesn't want to be a bother, plus she values herself much lower than the people around her. She sees herself as not being one of the ordinary people, and she can't get by without a drink. She has social media brain rot, feels she's incapable of love, and is at the age where her body is all aches and pains. Anyway, the lady's pen name is Juro Maru. She's a composer. She's her own character, of course, not a lazy stand-in for the author, but it's crystal clear who the author behind her is. In truth, there is no fantasy to the tale, just belief. Wanting to die sounds like a bad thing, so Juro Maru is instead focused on the next thing. There's not much hope for this world, but maybe the next world will be better, and maybe dying will get her there. Maybe that world will be fun, or maybe she'll be different, or basically anything other than reality. Like dolphins in an aquarium. Some accept life and cursed by, but some of them must feel sad. If they died, maybe they'd be reincarnated as one of the people smiling beyond the confines of their glass cage. It's a reincarnation theory, and in that endless cycle of life, some are born on the outside and are blessed with happiness, while others get trapped in an unfair world. Having known someone who went through a very long depression period, she too believed a similar thing, that it was okay to have lived such a sad life because the more important life she has in some greater world beyond our own is yet to be lived. A lot of the novel is like that. I recognise her thoughts and actions as something from my own life experience. The target audience of the work is firmly people like Maida, but as someone who isn't like Maida, the book is incredible at making me recognise and think about the depression that others in my life suffer from. Maybe it's because of the people I've known, or maybe it's because of how close she is to Maida, but Juro Maru is a very well realised character. That's the essence of the work. The contrast between a happy person working a mundane job and a depressed person working alongside celebrities becomes an obvious point of attention, and this spirals into a whole heap of conversations about topics that pertain to the perpetually depressed musician. during which the depressed girl is prone to long rants about the world. It is a slow-paced, low-stakes story full of protracted rambling from a depressed woman in mundane scenarios, and so you can really tell it's not meant to be a commercial product like Maida's Keyworks. It is, in essence, another Air, or Tomeu After, or Love Song, but even the more honest visual novels he worked on had some spice or drama to keep them entertaining to general audiences. Nekogarizoku no Osa has none of that. It is a simple story, the entertainment value of which depends on whether you find Juro Maru interesting or not. Does the gap between her stunted maturity and ample life experience keep you turning the pages? The only fallback is Maida's usual comedic style. A character says something silly, and another character points out how silly it is. Other than that, it's a heartfelt piece. I'm explaining all of this not only to highlight how specific the story is, but also to make a contrast to Heaven Burns Red, which, weirdly, is quite similar. Heaven Burns Red is exaggerated and cartoony, and it has a high-stakes mystery acting as the backbone of everything, but a majority of the text is essentially a lighter-hearted version of what this book is. It's a lot of food talk and a lot of manzai. To put it plainly, Heaven Burns Red is a little bit more fictional, but I feel like, at this point in time, the line between what Maida wants to write and what he actually produces is blurrier than ever. And that really makes me wonder, how blurry can you make that line before people start to complain? How true to himself is he allowed to be? For now, at the very least, Maida's purpose in life is clear. To make music for She Is Legend. If writing for Heaven Burns Red is a job, then making the music for it is a hobby. Utsukushi Hanasaku Okade is a song from Heaven Burns Red, and it's performed by the same band as usual, though the style of it is very different from their backlog. Very trendy with young audiences, but not something Maida has ever done before. The closest thing to this is maybe Koro Yume, but even that's not the same. Regardless, this song had a bit of vocal hate levied against it for multiple reasons of varying degrees of negativity. Firstly, and most importantly, it's not the kind of music that the band would perform. They aren't a spoken poetry band. Secondly, the singers don't suit the track. It's more of a Setsubatsu Kids song. Thirdly, the lyrics don't suit the story. And finally, it just sucks. It has a bad genre, or a bad sound, or many other things that people on 2chan and Twitter were saying. That's right, something Maida made is immediately garnering hate, which can only mean one thing. It's a song for Maida fans. Naturally, no one has translated the lyrics for this one, so forgive me if I write them on screen right now. Inside these lyrics, there are a bunch of direct references, but also some similarities in its messaging to songs and stories from Maida's past. It is, after all, a response to the stories Maida had been writing all of this time. It's incredibly self-indulgent and something that can only be fully admired if you are mad enough to go through all of Maida's creative works. But here we are.
医者やカウンセラーにも答えられない質問なんだ。生きるって何なんだ、答えを教えてよ。生きなきゃって分かったらプロポーズするから。あの宇宙に浮く美しい花咲く丘でしゃがりきになって働く。お昼は特製で作り弁当で優勝。死んでたよまらない日がキラキラと輝き出した。それは全部君と会えたから。会えたんだ、会えたよね。会えたんだ、会えた気がしただけど。夢だったわかってる。そんなもの。
Happiness is important. Ordinary people would be happy if they got married, had children, and watched their children grow older. It's easy to miss, but this is basically a non-answer. He says happiness and gives one definition, what ordinary people would find happiness in. He didn't, however, give his own definition. If the meaning of life is happiness, what is his happiness? Like fans talking about Air, Kanna was happy, but she could have been even happier. Is there any meaning in that? Didn't Kanna already find her meaning in life? Happiness is short form for something else, something that's different to every person. For some, it's marriage, for others, it isn't. As you can imagine, despite some negativity around the song, people who like Maeda really like this one. The main sentiment I saw at the time was that it wasn't She Is Legend singing. It was Maeda's soul shining through, as if, after writing so much fiction, he grew rebellious and spoke through the characters. Some loved that, others hated it. That's life. How much of this did he want to write? How much of it is he allowed to write? When the creator's voice conflicts with his responsibilities, which do you favour? What is his purpose? Why is he doing this? What is happiness? I don't think there's an answer. With that, the long story of our storyteller's life has reached the modern day. Resigned to a life romance never found its way into, a life where he can't write stories that people like, where he can't sing songs on a stage like he dreamed of, and where the normality of enjoyable daily life sounds like a dream. And yet, he's in demand, and everyone has high expectations of him. A burnt-out flame, forever uncertain whether to write for himself or for others. Unable to retire for fear of having free time, continuing to go with the flow of life until it leads him to the river Styx. I'd like to believe there's hope, and that all the connections Maeda has made throughout his career, from his childhood friend on the radio to the assistant writer who has worked alongside him since Air, even the relationships he fumbled, will one day bring the light he's always been looking for into his life. I'm not sure there's much power in belief though. Maeda would surely call that a dream. In a previous article, in regards to Hosaya writing in one, I once wrote, I've really been working with just my own brain for over a decade now. Before that, I was stuck at a school I hated, wasting my life away. There was never the time in this eternity of mine to ask for another's opinion, to ask for their help. For most people, that scene in one where the goofy protagonist switched off the lights will be a forgettable bit of comedy, but for one boy, it changed his life. The author of that scene will never know. I'll never be able to tell him, and that's just the reality of things. If people love a scene I write as much as I love that scene in one, I'll probably never know. That is the reality of things. It's evident from my writing here, from word choice to theming, and from the length of this video as a whole, that Maeda Jun's works have had an effect on my creative output. He'll never know that, and if he did, it wouldn't mean anything. The massive fans don't mean anything. There's little validation in a distant, analytical voice. I like the thing you made, so thank you, is a nice thing to say, but that won't erase loneliness from a man's life. It won't thaw a frozen heart, or mend a broken brain. In his long love song diary, Maeda once wrote, "But of all of them, it was the singer of Little Buster's Refrain's theme song, Suzu, who said, praise from a fan will never be what he needs. But these connections may be it. Maybe he'll find more reason to live than carrying on the responsibility left to him by his sire. Maybe he'll find more things to enjoy than 20-minute episodes of anime, or making, or listening to music." I'm not sure there's much power in belief, but I'd like to believe there's hope. Maeda, I'm sure, would call that a dream.